The breach had already happened. Thick clouds of dust still rolled out from the shattered mountainside as the first Delta assaulters crossed the broken access collar and disappeared into the dark cut. High above, the heavy rotor wash from the departing helicopters slowly faded behind the ridgeline, leaving behind only the thinner, sharper violence inside. The cracking of suppressed gunfire echoing down the concrete throat, the crunch of boots over broken aggregate, and the clipped, urgent radio calls flattened by headsets and tunnel echo. The outer charge had worked, but only partially. It had stripped away the security face of the entrance and peeled open the first heavy barrier. It had not, however, opened the bunker itself. Inside, the geometry turned wrong almost immediately. The tunnel was deeper and narrower than the satellite imagery had suggested. The turns were tighter, the blast walls far heavier. This was not a simple chamber bored into the rock. It was a carefully engineered, layered underground fortress designed to absorb shocks, divide intruders, and keep critical systems alive even after a direct hit. A twisted steel fire door hung off one hinge, still shuddering from the force of the blast. Beyond it, the corridor dropped at a steeper angle than expected. One lone Iranian defender fired 2 quick shots from the shadows and immediately fell back rather than hold his ground. It was not panic, it was disciplined, prepared delay. The target was a hardened missile support facility buried deep in the rugged mountains of western Iran. From the air, the site looked deliberately ordinary. A few utility sheds, a wide gravel apron, and ventilation stacks tucked neatly against the stone. But underneath lay the real complex. Reinforced galleries, massive blast doors, cable trunks, and segmented chambers hidden by layers of rock and clever misdirection. The mission was narrow and time-critical. A Delta assault troop, accompanied by a technical exploitation cell, overhead ISR support, and electronic warfare assets, had been inserted with a very short extraction window. Their task was clear. Verify whether the mountain concealed an active missile storage and guidance node. If it did, they were to capture high-value intelligence before it could be moved, launched, or buried deeper. If it turned out to be a decoy, they would know within minutes. That urgency came from a worrying pattern observed in the days leading up to the raid. Surveillance had tracked unusual logistics movements between military depots and quiet service roads. Intercepted communications hinted at dispersal protocols. Thermal signatures showed generator activity in areas that should have been dormant. CENTCOM was not worried about a single underground cache. They feared a complete hardened launch architecture, a network of buried nodes across a wide area that could survive airstrikes and support staggered missile operations. The bunker mattered because it sat at the junction of many possibilities: storage, fueling, launch preparation, targeting relay, and convoy routing. The most valuable items inside might not be the missiles themselves, but drives, launch tables, coded schedules, or maintenance ledgers that could map the entire network. On paper, the plan was precise and timed perfectly. Breach the outer face, descend rapidly, secure the elevator and service shaft junction, split the force at the lower cross corridor. One element would push toward the vault area, while the other cleared control and support rooms. The exploitation team would follow under heavy security, grab priority items, plant selective demolition charges, and exfil before regional response forces could react. Then the first clean plan died. Backup power surged online faster than expected. Fluorescent lights flickered once and then steadied into a cold, pale industrial glow, destroying the assumption that the initial blast had knocked out the entire complex. At the main shaft chamber, one key access route was already gone. Not from the explosion, but deliberately collapsed from inside. Concrete slabs, bent ladder sections, and fresh dust told the story clearly. At the same moment, a new thermal signature appeared deeper in a compartment that did not exist on any map. With no time to waste, the team adjusted instantly. The lead stack compressed and fed into a narrow secondary maintenance passage, one operator at a time. It was a utility corridor, never meant for combat. Hot pipes ran at shoulder height, exposed cable trays hung overhead, and standing water pooled in the low spots. The paint on the walls was blistered from years of generator heat. Every footstep changed sound as they moved from concrete to metal grating to bare rock and back again. Radio traffic began to fray, so the operators switched to shorter transmissions and more hand signals. Not total silence, just ruthless economy. At the far end, a heavy blast door had cycled halfway shut and jammed, leaving a dangerous gap blocked by twisted steel. The lead operator dropped to a knee, angled sideways, and pushed his rifle through first. The second man followed. The third operator hung for half a second as his kit snagged on the torn metal, and that half second was enough. A burst of rounds snapped through from the opposite side. Sparks flew off the door track. Concrete dust exploded from the wall at chest height. The defender did not stay to fight. He fired and vanished around the next bend. Once again, it was a prepared, professional withdrawal. The air grew heavier as they descended, thick with the smell of diesel, hot metal, and damp concrete. Generator chambers meant the power was still running. Power meant protected systems were still alive. In a junction room that should have held only generic stores, they found fresh packing foam, wheeled transport cradles, ratchet straps, and clear scrape marks where heavy cylindrical loads had been moved in a hurry. The room had been cleared recently. One wall still carried stenciled shipping notations in Farsi, along with coded blocks that did not match standard warehouse practice. The exploitation specialists photographed everything without stopping. The first large chamber brought more confusion than clarity. Missile tube sections stood neatly in ordered racks behind mesh partitions, but many bays were empty. Other containers held ballast and decoys designed to mimic real components on quick inspection. What had looked like a missile storage room was actually a sorting and transfer point. The defenders had not been hiding one inventory, they had been actively masking movement. The mountain was not just a cache, it was a hub. Deeper in, the bunker began to behave like a living organism under attack. Bulkhead doors started closing automatically by section, forcing the team to reroute constantly. A ceiling camera panned once before a suppressed round shattered it. Somewhere ahead, a forklift engine revved briefly and then died. Lighting dropped and switched to backup circuits. Obstacles, rolling tool cabinets and steel drums, appeared just enough to slow the assault stack without fully blocking the way. Delay had become the main defense. The midpoint of the operation came in a hardened operations room behind a reinforced door that required a linear charge to breach. Inside, the air was noticeably colder. Server racks lined two walls, and hardened terminals sat bolted to steel desks. A large digital wall map had gone dark, but one surviving repeater screen still showed a frozen frame. Multiple site identifiers, timing windows, directional arrows, and convoy route bands stretching far beyond this single mountain. Another terminal, running on backup power, displayed telemetry labels and coded launch sequences. This was clearly a node in a much larger dispersed launch and dispersal grid. That single discovery changed the mission instantly. Full demolition would destroy irreplaceable evidence. Staying longer to exploit fully risked being sealed inside or fixed in place long enough for enemy response forces to converge above. While the team leader made the hard call, two more internal bulkheads slammed shut deeper in the complex. Red emergency lights came on. A low mechanical warning tone sounded once and then cut out. Denial charges were arming somewhere below. The leader simplified the plan on the spot. Priority capture only. grab drives, notebooks, route boards, anything that could reveal the wider architecture. Use selective demolition instead of total destruction. The exploitation cell went to work ripping hardware from racks, while security elements covered every door and intersection. One operator bagged a grease-stained launch sequencing notebook. Another forcefully tore a removable data module from a shielded cabinet. Then the cost arrived without warning. A sudden collapse, whether from a defensive charge or structural failure, brought down part of the return corridor behind the rear security element. The concussion hammered through the walls like a giant fist. Lights burst. A solid sheet of dust drove into the room. When the comms net cleared, one breacher was down, badly wounded by shrapnel across his shoulder and neck seal. He was conscious, but losing strength in his arm. The original withdrawal route was now blocked under tons of broken concrete and tangled cables. Another chamber had already caught fire. They adapted immediately. Casualty moved to the center, loads lightened, unnecessary gear dumped in the dust. In a lower generator chamber, they discovered fueling rigs and missile handling equipment, but no actual warheads. The most dangerous payloads had already been moved out. Selective charges were placed on transformers, relay cabinets, and the room containing the route boards, enough to blind and disrupt the site without collapsing the entire mountain. The team then pushed hard through a secondary conduit not marked on any original map, following the flow of ventilation air and a sloping service cut toward the outer rock face. Every surface now vibrated with distant explosions. Dust fell in steady curtains from the ceiling seams. Emergency lights flickered between red and black. Radio calls shrank to bare call signs and gate words. One final ambush erupted from behind a maintenance panel. 2 quick suppressed shots answered it. Then, only the sound of heavy breathing and ringing ears remained. They did not exit through the original breach point. Instead, the column punched out through a service aperture above a buried access road on the protected side of the ridge. They emerged into the cool night air, thick with smoke and fine limestone dust. The extraction helicopter was already inbound, flying low and fast under terrain mask. The wounded operator was loaded first, followed by the precious exploitation bags. Behind them, the shaped charges began detonating in sequence. Muted thumps grew into deeper, heavier booms. Fire and thick black smoke vented dramatically from the mountain's ventilation stacks. From a safe distance, the damage appeared serious. One entrance had collapsed, outer power was gone, and auxiliary shafts were burning. But the mountain did not disappear. It simply exhaled. The bunker had been hit hard, not erased. The real shock came hours later, under clean lights and quiet air, when the recovered material was carefully translated and cross-referenced. The site identifiers did not point to one isolated chain. They revealed a sophisticated, dispersed architecture. Multiple support nodes, transfer routes, standby launch sectors, and hardened locations never previously connected. Many entries were already stale. One convoy notation showed movement just hours before the raid. CENTCOM had expected the racks, fuel systems, and control rooms. What truly changed the strategic picture was the proof of a flexible, redundant network protected by movement, deception, and depth. Destroy one node, and the system bent. It did not break. By dawn, smoke was still rising from the ridge. On distant operation screens, new threat markers were appearing in clusters. Some were only probabilities. Others were strong enough to redirect aircraft immediately. A few were already too late. The raid had forced the hidden network into the light for a brief moment. That was its success. It had also confirmed that the network was very real. That was the new, larger problem. Below the ash and broken concrete, the mountain had kept many of its secrets. And somewhere beyond it, The rest of the system was already moving.